Good evening. Welcome. My name is Leanne Martin, and I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I, along with Associate Dean Mark Geisler, Kim Eyre, Angie Vandenhoek, who else? Kirsten Anderson, who is outside, would like to welcome you to this final installment of the Dean's Lecture Series for this academic year. Tonight's lecture is brought to you by just a really wonderful and ongoing partnership between the City of Bellingham, who's providing this beautiful venue, and BTV, who's not only recording this lecture, but they'll also air it several times in the coming weeks. So thank you to our Bellingham partners and also to CHSS staff. Just as a matter of housekeeping, there will be time after Dr. Leonard finishes his talk to ask some questions. So Mark Geisler will be moving around with the microphone. So if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand and he's happy to bring the microphone to you. If you're in the balcony area, all you need to do is step over to that microphone. It's a live microphone, so you can ask questions from there as well. But please do wait until you have the microphone in your hand because this is being recorded. Part of the mission of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences states that students learn to devise and apply innovative solutions, embrace divergent worldviews, and consider the ethical implications of their actions. Tonight, Dr. Kevin Leonard will also do this as he discusses pledging allegiance, the Ku Klux Klan, and religious freedom in Bellingham in the 1920s. Dr. Leonard received his bachelor's degree from Pomona College, his master's and his PhD from the University of California, Davis. He started at Western in 1997. He's currently the department chair for the history department up at Western. His teaching areas include African American history, LGBT history, and the U.S. West. And in 2013, Dr. Leonard was awarded the Outstanding Faculty Leadership Award. He authored the book, The Battle for Los Angeles, Racial Ideology and World War II, as well as many journal articles and chapters. His scholarship examines racism, social injustices, race relations, and issues of sexuality, all from a historian's view. He's published in the top journals in the field, including the Journal of the West, Journal of the History of Sexuality, and Western Historical Quarterly, and he's also presented at the top scholarly venues in the field, including the annual meetings and conferences of the American Studies Association, American Society for Environmental History, the Association for African American Historical Research and Preservation, and the American Historical Association. I think one of his most interesting talks was entitled Mad Dogs and Angry People, Race and Rabies in Cold War Los Angeles. I know Dr. Leonard to be a wonderful colleague and a tremendous asset to Western. I also know that Dr. Leonard was born on this day several years ago. So happy birthday, Dr. Leonard. So it's my great pleasure to present to you Dr. Kevin Leonard.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you all for coming this evening. I'm very pleased to see so many people I know in the audience, as well as some people I don't know. I am going to be a historian and more or less read a prepared talk, because if I don't, I will leave things out and forget about things that are very important. But I will have images for you to look at while I'm speaking as well. So I hope that I don't bore you too dreadfully. At some point prior to September 1925, John W. and Ethel Tremaine gravitated toward the Elijah Voice Society, whose members followed the teachings of Charles Taze Russell and referred to themselves as Christian Bible students. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Russell had urged his followers to obey the laws, even if that meant they might be conscripted and forced to serve in the military. However, Russell and his disciples were horrified by the bloodshed of World War I, and Joseph Franklin Rutherford, who became the president of the Watchtower Society upon Russell's death in 1916, was convicted of violating the Espionage Act for publishing materials that denounced the war. The Tremaines accepted the Bible students' argument that it was morally wrong and unchristian to salute the U.S. flag, since the flag was a symbol of militarism. As a new school year approached, the Tremaines met with officials at Bellingham's Franklin School. The Franklin School stood on the lot where Franklin Park is now, at the corner of Whatcom and Grant Street, actually in the York neighborhood. John and Ethel Tremaine tried to convince the principal that national patriotism tends towards militarism and war and is therefore contrary to the teachings of the Bible and true Christianity. They asked the principal to excuse their 9-year-old son, Russell, who was starting the 4th grade at the school, from patriotic exercises. The principal, however, explained that state law required all public school students to salute and pledge allegiance to the flag and refused to excuse Russell Tremaine from these mandatory exercises. From the point of view of John and Ethel Tremaine, the principal's decision left them with only one option. Since they could not condone their son's participation in acts that they considered disobedient to God, they decided not to send their son to school. The Tremaines' actions set in motion a series of events that constituted a long and painful ordeal for the family. After Russell Tremaine failed to appear at school on September 14, 1925, law enforcement officials arrested John Tremaine, who admitted that he was guilty of failing without cause to keep his child of school age in school. Tremaine spent time in jail because he refused to pay the $25 fine. Because the Tremaines continued to refuse to send their son back to school, Judge W.P. Brown removed Russell from the custody of his parents. Russell Tremaine spent more than 2 years living away from his parents' home, first at the county detention home, then with relatives here in Whatcom County, and later at a children's home in Seattle. In part as a result of their legal troubles, the Tremaines ended up moving from their home on Ellis Street, which is pictured here, where they had lived for several years, and which you can see also here. It's still around. It was built in 1900. I go past it on a regular basis and remember that it was where the Tremaines lived. But they moved from there to a residence at 412 Girard Street, which is actually right across the street, I believe, in that direction from where we are right now. The original building that was there in 1925 is no longer there, I believe. And eventually they moved to Seattle to be closer to their son. All 3 members of the family remained in Seattle for the remainder of their lives. When I first became fascinated by this case a few years ago, I had no idea that in 2015 we would be witnessing the consideration and passage of Religious Freedom Restoration Acts in several states. And this always reminds me of something I say to my students on a regular basis, which is the study of the past does not really qualify a person to predict the future. So when you hear a historian predicting the future, be a little skeptical. So I couldn't predict this, but I'm fascinated by the actions of state legislatures in 2015, in part because these actions strike me as quite different from the events of 1925. Legislators who have supported Religious Freedom Restoration Acts in the recent past, and these lawmakers have constituted a large majority in most states that have considered such legislation, have expressed the fear that federal court rulings might force people to act against their religious convictions by requiring them to provide goods or services to same-gender couples. In the 1920s, by contrast, lawmakers and judges insisted that children had to salute the flag, even if such an action violated the religious beliefs of the students or their parents. Only a handful of civil liberties advocates stood up for the religious liberties of people who believed that the flag salute was an act of disobedience to the laws of God. And here I've included a photograph. This is actually not from Bellingham. It's not from 1925. It's from a little bit later, and I felt comfortable using it because it's actually in the public domain because it was taken by a federal government photographer. But it's a photograph of school children in Rochester, New York, in the early 1940s pledging allegiance to the flag. And the flag salute in those days bore some resemblance to what we might refer to as the Nazi salute, although the hand was palm up when you saluted the flag in those days. Now, even though this is a public lecture and not a presentation to an exclusively academic audience, even though I know that there are academics in the audience, I still feel the need to say something about the historical literature that I'm trying to engage in this project. Only a relative handful of scholars have studied Charles Taze Russell's Bible student movement. All of these scholars have noted that participants in this movement began facing persecution as early as World War I. The Tremaine case, however, has received little attention from scholars. Jennifer Jacobs Henderson, a communications scholar who has carefully examined the case, has interpreted it as a precursor to later legal victories by the Jehovah's Witnesses. In a 2004 article, Henderson challenged historical scholarship that suggested that the Jehovah's Witnesses' court victories, which expanded religious liberty protections under the First Amendment to the Constitution, were accidental, and those victories came in the 1940s during World War II. Henderson pointed out that the witnesses had established a national legal team in 1935, 8 years before they succeeded in persuading the majority of U.S. Supreme Court justices to rule that children in school could not be compelled to salute the flag. In her 2005 article specifically on the Tremaine case, Henderson noted that the punishment of the members of the Tremaine family occurred more than a decade before the first flag salute case, which is Millersville School District versus Gobitis, which was appealed to the Supreme Court. Henderson explained that John W. Tremaine's conviction was not appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court for several reasons. First, Henderson argues, school authorities and Judge Brown strictly adhered to the letter of the law, giving the family's legal supporters limited grounds on which to appeal the judge's actions. Also, the Elijah Voice Society exercised great influence on the Tremaine family, and the Elijah Voice Society was not particularly interested in pursuing action through the courts. Henderson further argues that overwhelming public sentiment against the Tremaines and the American Civil Liberties Union, as well as the ACLU's belated interest in the case and lack of legal authority, prevented judicial appeals. Finally, and most importantly, Henderson shows the Tremaine case did not become a test case because John W. and Ethel Tremaine refused to fight for their rights in court. Now, there is much that could be said about the Tremaine case in addition to what Henderson has done. And my goal in this talk this evening is not to challenge Henderson's interpretation. I'm less interested in explaining why the case was not appealed to the Supreme Court than I am in understanding how Bellingham residents responded to the Tremaine's challenge to the state law requiring public school students to salute the flag. Why they responded as they did, and what these responses reveal about religion and citizenship in the Pacific Northwest during the interwar period. Articles about this case and other articles from the Bellingham Herald, court records, and documents produced by the Elijah Voice Society suggest that appointed and elected officials such as Judge Brown found the Tremaine's beliefs about the rights and duties of citizens and their actions quite troubling. These officials and their supporters, including the publisher of the Bellingham Herald, insisted that tolerance of the disobedience of the flag salute would lead to anarchy. They also argued that boys in public schools should be forced to salute the flag so that they would grow up to be patriotic citizens who were willing to fight and die if necessary for their country. Judges and journalists also directly attacked the Tremaine's pacifist religious beliefs, dismissing them as the fanatical views of a small minority. Finally, the Tremaine case should be considered in the larger context in which it occurred, and this is where the Ku Klux Klan comes in. At the same time that Judge Brown was deciding the fate of the Tremaine family, the Klan was active and visible in Whatcom County. Journalists and elected officials denounced the beliefs of John and Ethel Tremaine, but they frequently tolerated the beliefs of Ku Klux Klan members, even as they occasionally criticized the Klan for its divisiveness. Now that I've acknowledged the presence of the Klan in Whatcom County in the 1920s, I would like to say a few words about the historical literature on the Klan in the Pacific Northwest. In several thoughtful articles, a few historians have interpreted the growth and decline of the Klan in Oregon in the 1920s. These scholars have been able to make use of some records created by Klan members. William Toll, for example, explained that residents of Tillamook, Oregon, joined the Klan in an effort to exert some control over the negative effects of economic growth. According to David A. Horowitz, who has most thoroughly studied the Oregon Klan, men throughout Oregon joined the Klan not only because they supported its statements about Christian morality, but also because they found its fraternal rituals meaningful. The Klan, Horowitz wrote, sought to restore the social integration and political conformity destroyed by urbanization, geographic mobility, and the erosion of group standards. This brought the desire to enforce social morality by public law and further moral supervision through politics. And even though the Klan in Oregon has been studied, very little has been written about Klan activity in the state of Washington, and only a handful of scholars, mostly local historians, have written about the Klan in Whatcom County. And I have one more introductory point to make, even though I've been talking for a while, before I embark on the rest of my presentation, which is conclusions that I've drawn from my analysis of documents produced in the 1920s. Prior to this point in my career, as Dean Martin pointed out, most of my research has focused on Los Angeles. Now, when you write about Los Angeles, you do not often have to devote much time to an explanation of the significance of the people and events you study. By the 1920s, Los Angeles was the largest city in the West, and its status as the capital of the film industry allowed local events to resonate with national cultural significance. When you decide to write about Bellingham, Washington, however, you do have to explain why anyone should care about what happened in this out-of-the-way small city. However, I'm going to argue that events in Bellingham in the mid-1920s were significant beyond Washington's fifth largest city, which boasted a population of 25,000 in 1920. Challenges to state laws that required public school students to salute the flag were rare, and both official and public responses to the Tremaine case allow us to see how some people understood the relationship between religious unorthodoxy, religious liberty, and patriotism. On a more fundamental level, I also want to challenge the assumption that important events do not happen in small, out-of-the-way cities and towns, since my research is increasingly moving in the direction of looking at what happens in these places. When we look back at the Tremaine case from the 21st century, it seems remarkable that officials reacted as they did to the Tremaine's request that Russell not be required to salute the flag or recite the Pledge of Allegiance. From John W. Tremaine's first appearance in court, the judge expressed his opinion that the crime to which Tremaine pleaded guilty was more serious than the legislature acknowledged. Judge Brown said, "The regrettable thing about this law is that the penalty is not commensurate with the crime, and the statute binding the hand of the court to a maximum fine of $25 and costs is a disgrace to the legislature." At this point in time, however, Judge Brown did not elaborate on his belief of the importance of mandatory flag salutes. He just said that he should, as a judge, be able to impose a stiffer fine or greater penalty. Moreover, Judge Brown's actions did not seem unreasonable to the publisher of the Bellingham Herald, one of the daily newspapers published in Bellingham in 1925 and 1926. In an editorial published in late January 1926, after the judge had placed Russell Tremaine in the custody of the Washington Children's Home, the Herald's publisher praised the judge. "There is not a more humane judge in this state, nor any other state, than W.P. Brown," the publisher declared. He tried to solve this Tremaine case without resorting to severe measures, but at every turn he was defied by the boy's parents, and as a last resort, concluded that if young Russell Tremaine is to become a good citizen, it is best to put him under influences vastly more wholesome than those of his own home. The actions of John W. and Ethel Tremaine troubled the judge in part because he interpreted those actions as a sign of disrespect for the authority of the laws. Both in his initial ruling in September 1925 and 9 months later, when he decreed that Russell Tremaine be given to the Washington Children's Home for adoption with Christian, patriotic parents, Judge Brown insisted that all laws are equally important and that the legal system cannot tolerate violations of any laws because this would send the message to all citizens that it is acceptable to ignore all laws. In September 1925, he told John W. Tremaine that the law of the land says you cannot live in its society and not comply with society's laws. The judge also decreed that there is only one recourse for the majority at this time, and that is force of law, and if there's anything I can do to compel you to live up to the laws of this nation, I am going to do it. In his June ruling, several months later, Brown indicated that he believed that all laws are equally important. Brown asked several rhetorical questions which emphasized the danger of tolerating disobedience of any law. The judge asked, "Is crime to be avoided where parents teach disrespect for any law, flag law or laws relating to intoxicating liquor, or laws relating to morals or laws relative to taking life or property?" Later in his ruling, the judge answered his question, declaring that if one may refuse to obey the laws requiring flag exercises, another may violate the motor laws, another may violate the liquor laws, and another may violate the law which says, "Thou shalt not kill." So it was clearly a short step from not saluting the flag to murder. A second rhetorical question was more speculative. If there is a crime wave, will it ever subside if parents are thus to instruct their children either by precept or example? The judge also insisted that to advocate disregarding a law or laws is to deaden conscience, teach immorality, invite chaos, welcome tumult, bring back the doctrine that might makes right. Laws are necessary, and nature demands that laws be followed, and so does man require them to be followed. If the parents of this boy are to be allowed to be willful lawbreakers, to set a law aside because it suits a real or fancied religious conviction, then others may claim religious convictions and set other laws at naught, and that would be the end of all law, and the progress of mankind toward the goal of higher civilization would be stopped. So, as much as Judge Brown insisted that violations of every law had to be prosecuted in order to prevent widespread lawlessness, his rulings make clear that he thought the law requiring students to salute the flag and pledge allegiance to it was especially important. Brown clearly believed that all boys needed to grow up to love their country and respect its institutions. When he awarded the Washington Children's Home permanent custody of Russell Tremaine in June 1926, Brown stated that the Tremaines' refusal to send their son to the public schools placed the child in danger of growing up to lead an idle, dissolute, and immoral life because it taught him not to love his country, respect its flag, and the institutions for which it stands. Judge Brown also expressed the belief that every male citizen had a duty to fight for his home and loved ones, either on his own or foreign soil, and that the Tremaines were teaching a disregard to duty and advocating poor citizenship. Brown further explained in his ruling why he couldn't be lenient with the Tremaines. He insisted that tolerance of the Tremaines' refusal to allow their son to salute the flag could encourage other citizens to refuse to allow their children to study subjects such as literature, for such describes our heroes and would inspire love of country and willingness to defend it as patriots of old have done. So, and it's kind of easy to make light of this, but on the same level, we have to recognize that this judge was really sincere about his belief that if he didn't punish the Tremaines severely, that other people might take action that would undermine the society at the time. Right. At the heart of the case, however, despite the fact that the judge kept bringing up the possibility that law and order would completely break down if he didn't punish the Tremaines, at the heart of the case was the acceptability of John W. and Ethel Tremaine's religious beliefs. When Tremaine first appeared in court, he explained to Judge Brown why he did not want his son to salute the flag. The flag of the United States, he said, is emblematic of war, and to salute the flag an indication of willingness to go to war, to kill your fellow man. Tremaine further explained, as we see it, the law of God is higher than the law of man. It has been decreed, and it is the understanding that the nations of the world are going down, are disintegrating for a newer, higher order, while the people are fighting to maintain an old system which is against the ideals and principles of God. Tremaine added, I firmly believe there will be a revolution, anarchical, within the next few years. God will reestablish the world and teach righteousness. Now, both the judge and the editor of the Bellingham Herald challenged the legitimacy of Tremaine's beliefs, suggesting that they were far outside the mainstream of American religion and therefore should be not only dismissed but punished. In its September 16, 1925 edition, the newspaper reported that Tremaine professed no particular creed, but acknowledged an absolute belief in the literal interpretation of the Bible. This article also described Tremaine's views as fundamentalistic and indicated that he was outspoken in condemnation of the theories of evolution. However, the Herald noted, Tremaine did not, when asked by the court, cite on what biblical grounds he had removed his child from a local public school, or on what theory he concluded that saluting the flag of his country was against the ideals of Christianity. In the January 1926 editorial, to which I've already referred, the Herald's publisher described the Tremaines as confirmed fanatics and unfit to have the custody of that child. The editorial also stated that the Tremaines wrongfully claimed that there is scriptural justice for their course. They said they recognized no other power but that issuing from the court of heaven. So in part what's playing out here is this debate about what is the correct thing to believe religiously, right? Now, in his initial meeting with John W. Tremaine, Judge Brown indicated his profound disagreement with Tremaine's religious beliefs. The judge declared, "It is regrettable that you are so absolutely sincere in your belief, but I give you credit for that sincerity. And by that token, I realize it is useless for me to talk to you." Brown suggested, he talked a lot even though he thought it was useless. Brown suggested that Tremaine's beliefs were probably wrong because they reflected the beliefs of a small minority. "I doubt that there are 5 people in Bellingham in your frame of mind, or 5,000 in the whole United States," the judge stated. "You may be right. A minority of one right against a majority of millions. Wrong. But I must say, right or wrong in your opinions, if your aim is a crown of glory, you have a thorny path to tread, and the load will be heavy. You will be tired at the end of your day's travel." And at the end of his of his remarks, the judge explicitly identified his theological difference with Tremaine. I don't believe the Lord would allow the world to go on doing wrong in a secular way if it was against his wish. Now, as the judge's words suggest, Tremaine and Brown held very different beliefs about God. It is important to remember, however, that Brown represented the state's authority to prevent one of its citizens from acting upon his or her religious beliefs, and it didn't work the other way. Tremaine couldn't force the judge not to, or try to force the judge not to exercise his own religious beliefs. Now, another judge actually suggested that Tremaine's words and actions indicated that he might be mentally ill. And I've included here in this image, you see that the article is there. Here I can even use the pointer here. The article's there, but then one of the common things that appears in newspapers from this time are advertisements for various digestive aids. So I included that just so it gives you something else to look at besides a lot of text. So a week after Tremaine first entered a guilty plea, he was arraigned on a second charge of failing to keep his child in school. And at this time, Tremaine refused to enter a plea or to answer most of Judge E.E. Hardin's questions, explaining that he was an ambassador for the court of heaven who recognized no court except the Lord's. Now, in response to Tremaine's behavior and his statements, Judge Hardin said, "I want to know if you are willfully guilty or mentally irresponsible." And Hardin also suggested that he might recommend a sanity hearing, although that didn't happen. When he granted custody of Russell Tremaine to the Washington Children's Home in June 1926, Judge Brown took direct aim at John W. and Ethel Tremaine's religious beliefs. The judge insisted that the millennium is not here, and so long as individuals fight, so will nations. In his attack on the Tremaine's religious beliefs, he invoked the words and actions of Civil War veterans. If to salute the flag is a wrong against God, the judge said, then the noble men of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, the veterans organization for Civil War veterans on the Union side, have been doing an injury to society, and younger generations like the Spanish War veterans and American Legion, who are following the GAR, should change their plans and follow the teachings of the parents of this boy. To drive his point home, Brown asked rhetorically, can it be that the millions of fine men and women of America who salute the flag are violating a law of God, and the legislature commands such violation? And then Brown stated explicitly his theological disagreement with the Elijah Voice Society and the Tremaines. I do not believe God would punish parents for following the laws as enacted and as on the statute books. And he also declared that the greatest good to the greatest number must be the guide. The will of the great majority must prevail. After presenting a litany of Tremaine's actions that Brown considered contemptuous of the court, he stated, the boy's welfare is paramount, first, fundamental, and he must have surroundings such as will make him a good citizen. He does not have such surroundings in the home of his parents while they're in their present mental attitude, which undoubtedly is fixed. And so you can see here that this religious conflict gets expressed by a judge. It's supported by some of the editorialists writing for the newspapers. It's difficult to determine exactly what everyday local people in Bellingham thought about this. That's research I have left to do to try to figure out a little bit more than that. 2 months before the Herald published its editorial denouncing the Tremaine's religious fanaticism, it had published a very different front-page editorial. This editorial appeared beneath the headline, Progress and Peace, or Turmoil, Which? It urged readers to vote for John A. Kellogg, the incumbent in the November 7th mayoral election. And here I am standing in City Hall, not too far from the mayor's office, and I liked being able to talk about this in this setting. The editorial's author praised Kellogg, noting that he has given Bellingham one of its finest and cleanest administrations, and declaring that administration should not be disturbed as long as it renders the kind of service it has been performing. The editorial warned that the election of Kellogg's opponent could cost Bellingham its good name as a progressive and stable city. The author acknowledged that the population of Bellingham included people with different political and religious beliefs, some of whom were being prosecuted in the court at that time, and stated that Kellogg and the city council were cooperating to give all of the people of Bellingham, regardless of political or religious ties, a wholesome government. Although the editorial did not identify Kellogg's opponent by name, it did make clear that this unidentified opponent was affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan. The Herald editorialist asked rhetorically, wouldn't it be too bad if Bellingham should come to be known as a city that preferred the notoriety of a Klan wrangle rather than to enjoy the reputation of a city of home-loving, neighborly, tolerant, and enterprising people? The author followed up with 3 other rhetorical questions. Would anybody, save a few office holders, gain anything worthwhile from a Klan victory? Would it increase the number of building permits and give more days' work? Would it be beneficial to the merchant, the professional men and women, the property owner? Even though these rhetorical questions obviously did not need an answer, the editorial offered one. You know very well it would be a setback for Bellingham that would be worse than a plague. This anti-Klan editorial may have surprised some readers of the Herald. Prior to the publication of this editorial, articles in the newspaper had tended to depict the Ku Klux Klan locally and nationwide as a respectable civic organization, not as a source of discord. Just a week before the editorial was published, the Herald featured a photograph of the building in Washington, D.C., into which the Klan's national headquarters had moved. This photograph appeared below the headline, as you can see, National Headquarters of Klan in New Home in Washington. And just 3 days before the editorial was published, the Herald included a photograph of the oldest and youngest KKK member. Neither the headlines nor the captions beneath these photographs suggested that readers should have harbored negative thoughts or feelings toward the Klan. Despite the fact that no historians have fully studied Ku Klux Klan membership and actions in Bellingham specifically or Washington more broadly, although some have studied part of that history, articles in the Bellingham newspapers make clear that the Klan was active in Bellingham in the mid-1920s. Because no Klan records have been made accessible to researchers, we cannot draw the kinds of conclusions that Toll and David Horowitz were able to draw from such records in their research on Oregon communities. However, we can see from articles in the Herald that reporters and editorialists assumed that their readers were familiar with the Klan, its position, and its program. None of the articles about the Klan explain or defend the Klan's anti-black, anti-immigrant, and anti-Catholic platform. The articles also reveal that Klan members in Bellingham, like their counterparts in Oregon, acted as if they were members of a fraternal organization comparable to the Elks or other such organizations. The Herald staff seems to have agreed, at least to some degree. Because the articles did not mention the Klan's political position, they implied that it was primarily a social organization. For example, in April 1926, 3 months after Judge Brown gave custody of Russell Tremaine to the Children's Home, the Klan attempted to enter afloat into the annual Tulip Festival parade. The Tulip Festival was generally depicted as an inclusive civic ritual. The newspaper articles and editorials about the controversy that followed from the Klan's efforts to participate in the parade are perplexing. They never identify by name either any members of the Tulip Cabinet, which was responsible for planning and executing the festival, or any representatives of the Klan. The articles and editorials make clear that some members of the Tulip Cabinet were not persuaded that the Klan was simply another fraternal organization. An article in the April 29, 1926 issue of the Herald, for example, noted that the Tulip Cabinet was unable to reach a decision about whether or not to admit the Klan float. The article's author reported that it was understood that Wednesday's session was rather heated and 3 members of the cabinet threatened to resign. So even though the Herald is not depicting the Klan as this very divisive organization, it gets reported that way, even within its own pages. Now, without explicitly criticizing the Klan for its political positions or actions, it wasn't just that people thought that the Klan's float was not going to be attractive, right? They didn't want the Klan in the parade because of what it stood for, right? So without explicitly criticizing the Klan for its political positions or actions, the publisher of the Herald penned an editorial urging the Klan to withdraw their proposal for a float. Instead of insisting that a float sponsored by a white supremacist, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant organization did not belong in an inclusive community ritual, the editor called upon the Klan members to withdraw their parade application in order to eliminate the friction that has developed. The problem then was not that the Klan questioned the right of many people to live in the United States, but that the Klan generated friction. The editor pointed out that the Klansmen professed to have the best interests of the community at heart and declared that if that were true, they would withdraw their application. that would solve the whole problem and relieve the Tulip Cabinet of embarrassment and division. In a brief editorial the following day, the Herald's publisher praised the Klan for its decision to withdraw its application for a float in the parade. The editorial reported that the Klan had withdrawn its application in the interests of harmony, and the Herald feels that on this account it is entitled to commendation for a praiseworthy act. So again, the Herald typically praised the Klan for not pushing its agenda too vocally. It is not clear if the Klan decided to have a picnic, parade, and demonstration in Bellingham after its leaders decided to withdraw their float from the Tulip Festival, but the Klan did schedule such events for May 15, 1926, shortly after the conclusion of the Tulip Festival. The organization's plans for its celebration brought it into conflict with city officials. The Klan had to seek permission to use city parks for its events. Bellingham's Park Board granted the Klan permission to use a portion of Cornwall Park, the city's largest park, for its picnic and meeting. However, the board unanimously refused to allow the Ku Klux Klan to burn a cross atop Seaholm Hill. According to the article that appeared in the Herald, the Park Board treated the proposed cross burning as advertising for the Klan, declaring that it was not a function of the board to permit certain forms of advertising on property over which it had jurisdiction, and all agreed that the same refusal would result should any other civic, fraternal, labor, or religious organization ask for such a permit. The fact that they were not allowed to burn a cross on Seaholm Hill did not apparently dampen the spirits of Klan members. The Herald again treated the Klan as comparable to any other fraternal organization in its report on the Klan parade through downtown Bellingham on the evening of Saturday, May 15, 1926. The newspaper reported that more than 700 Klan members participated in the parade, which began with fireworks and bombs and wound through the business district, forming a line nearly a mile long. The parade featured a float symbolic of liberty, who was represented by a Linden Klanswoman. It was the entry that the Klan had intended making in the Tulip Festival parade. According to the article in the Herald, several thousand spectators watched the parade. And you can see from this photograph that there was quite a crowd of people gathered to watch the parade. Many people lined up on the curbs 90 minutes before the parade began. In one respect, the newspapers reported treated the Klan as if it were primarily a fraternal organization. The article did not mention the Klan's political ideology, and it identified the secretary of the organization, G.W. McKibben. However, the article also cast suspicion on the local Klan. It pointed out that McKibben had emphasized that most of the participants in the demonstration were from Whatcom County, of which Bellingham is the county seat, as you know. He said that all the men on horses were Whatcom County Klansmen. According to McKibben, a few visiting dignitaries rode in cars, but few visitors were in the line of march, practically all being Whatcom County Klansmen. But the Herald article cast doubt upon this and suggested, in a very interesting way, that it might not be local people who were participating in this march. The Herald article noted that spectators recognized few Bellingham men and women in the parade, and that there was quite a large delegation bearing the banner of the Grays Harbor Klan, which was, so far as could be observed, the only outside delegation thus identifying itself. The author of the article also pointed out that McKibben would not provide the names of all of the Klan officers, explaining that rather than omit some names through failure to remember them, he preferred that none be published. He also withheld the name of the Klanswoman on the float representing liberty. So even though on one level the Herald is going along with this depiction of the Klan as more or less a fraternal or civic organization, it's also making readily apparent to its readers that it was not acting like a regular civic or fraternal organization whose members would willingly be identified by name. As I hope we can see from this admittedly brief examination of the debate surrounding the Ku Klux Klan's visibility in Bellingham, which can be seen as a backdrop for the Tremaine case, events in Bellingham in the 1920s reflected political and cultural developments on the state, regional, and national level. Local officials and community leaders expressed support for tolerance of political and religious differences, but at the same time they expressed support and occasionally praise for the Ku Klux Klan, which was deeply intolerant of African Americans, Catholics, Jews, immigrants from many nations, and people who did not embrace the Klan's vision of Christian morality. Political and community leaders elsewhere in the state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest, and around the United States also expressed ambivalence toward the Klan. Many of these leaders refused to denounce the Klan, even as they expressed support for tolerance. Bellingham officials and community leaders' statements about John and Ethel Tremaine also reflected political and cultural developments on the state, regional, and national level. Neither Whatcom County's judges nor newspaper editors expressed tolerance for the religious beliefs expressed by John and Ethel Tremaine. Instead, the judges and the editors felt that the Tremaines' religious beliefs were so dangerous that the family should be punished by the state. In this respect, Bellingham was not remarkably different from other communities around the state, region, or nation. Few people anywhere in the country expressed support for the religious freedom of people they described as religious fanatics in the 1920s. Events in Bellingham, however, did not simply reflect political and cultural developments on the state, regional, and national level. Local officials and community leaders' actions and words regarding the Tremaine case also helped to influence events at the national level. The American Civil Liberties Union and a small number of other advocates of civil liberties carefully monitored the Tremaine case. And even though the ACLU was not able to persuade the Tremaine family and the Elijah Voice Society to appeal Judge Brown's decisions, these events in a small, seemingly out-of-the-way city undoubtedly influenced the ACLU's later efforts to protect the religious freedom of people like John and Ethel Tremaine. Thank you. I would just like to remind you, I'm glad to answer any questions. I would just like to remind you that you need to either go, if you're in the upstairs area, you need to go to the microphone, or if you're down here in the lower level, wait until the microphone is in front of you before you start speaking.
Yeah, it's okay. So my question is around sources. You mentioned there's nothing available for the Ku Klux Klan. Why not? And kind of what would that allow us to piece together from this story if you had records from the Klan?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, of course, this is one of the complexities of studying the Klan, because basically where Klan records have surfaced and have been donated to libraries or archives, it's kind of hit or miss, and sometimes people have found such records and convinced people to donate them. But most people who were involved with the Klan at some point in their experience became embarrassed by their involvement, and so they didn't want people to know that they had these records. And the Klan was a secret organization as well. So even though we know from the records that have surfaced, in fact, David Horowitz edited a collection of documents, which are not all that exciting, but they are the internal documents of the Klan group in La Grande, Oregon. And so he was able to publish those documents. They don't reveal everything that went on, but they do reveal something about the inner workings of the organization, the degree to which they might have actually struggled with actions when they would have tried to intimidate people. What I think it would give to this project if I knew that such records really existed, and mostly what we have are records that were produced by people who worked against the Klan. So, for example, one source or one set of sources, which I haven't looked at very closely because it's a little bit before the Tremaine case, and I'm still relatively early in the process of doing some of my research, and I'm a slow researcher, but they're very thorough. In 1923, I believe it was, the Klan sponsored with support from some other organizations, it sponsored an initiative which would have required all school children to attend public schools. And it was patterned on one that had passed the year before in Oregon. It didn't pass in Washington, but largely that was because the U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled it unconstitutional. Nonetheless, there was still mobilizing. The recently formed Linden Christian School and the families that sent their children to that school mobilized. The local Catholics here in Bellingham organized as well to try to defend the Assumption Catholic School. And they worked with other people who were opposed to the Klan to try to prevent the passage of this piece of legislation. So it's much easier to find records that were produced by people who opposed the Klan than it is by internal Klan than it is to find internal Klan documents. But I do think those Klan documents would give me more of a sense of kind of exactly what people felt about religion in particular. And this is very new for me because even though I consider religion important in historical study, I don't fully understand the religious beliefs of the people I'm writing about. I don't understand the evolution of those beliefs, and part of that is that there isn't a very large secondary literature that's academic that deals with that. So I hope that somewhat answered the question.
I have a statement and a question. The statement is that I think to understand the Ku Klux Klan and its appeal at that time, its power, it's important to view the film The Birth of a Nation, which was made in 1913.
Yeah.
It was a breakthrough film in terms of cinematography, but also it conveys, at least at the time, the appeal of the Klan. And it helps us get back into that mindset. My question is, what have you found out, do you know about the background, education, training of Judge Brown?
I don't know very much about the judge. I've spent some time trying to track down some information and not with much success. And part of that is that I'm also relatively new to doing legal research. I've done some work with court records, but I don't know very much about how you find out a lot of details about judges and their background. I'm very intrigued by Judge Brown, but it's difficult to find anything that I haven't found very much that's been written about him specifically. I'd love to know more, and if you know of any sources that I can turn to find out more about that. Because he does seem to have very strong beliefs. The Herald praised him effusively. So I do think that he had a pretty strong reputation in the state at the time, being a fair jurist. But I just don't have any sense of really what the background was. I do have more background on the Tremaine family, which I didn't really bring in tonight because one of my favorite research tools now is Ancestry.com, and so I'm able to trace their movements quite a bit. I know where members of the family were born, but at the same time, I'm not able to figure out very much how they came to their religious beliefs as well, because especially with John Tremaine, one of the things that is available through Ancestry.com is the fact that he registered for the draft during World War I. And many people from actually early on, Russell himself before he died, Charles Russell himself before he died, actually said that people should comply with conscription, even though their ultimate goal would be to serve in a capacity where they wouldn't actually have to kill another person. But by the time that Tremaine registered for the draft, I think it was 1917 or so, and I don't believe that he was associated with the Bible student movement at that point in time. I think that was a little bit later in the 20s that he gravitated towards that.
I have a question about gender in the Tremaine family, which this picture is making me think of. The Judge Brown seems to have been addressing his remarks to John Tremaine and not to Ethel. Or was this something that was seen in terms of a father's responsibility for a son, or how much is this about a mother's responsibility as well? Does Ethel Tremaine show up at all in the sources in any way other than this?
Not very much, and that's actually one of the times I presented this as a conference paper. I presented part of this research as a conference paper. I was trying to look at it from the angle of gender. I was trying to figure out what was going on. I decided that I wanted to give a broader overview of what was going on in Bellingham at this point tonight. But at one point early on in the case, the judge did threaten to bring charges against Ethel as well, and this was when John was in jail serving off his fine. That never happened, and Ethel Tremaine actually is visible mostly in the materials produced by the Elijah Voice Society, in which they're telling the story. I mean, and this is one of the frustrating things for me is I can't find very much out about exactly what the Elijah Voice Society believed, but I can find lots of documents, because they're in the ACLU records, of the Elijah Voice Society telling the story of Russell Tremaine and how heartless the state was in taking him away from his parents. And so they always depict Ethel as this very noble, sympathetic figure. But we don't see her words very often. There was one letter that she and John jointly signed, in which they kind of defend themselves a little bit. But I am really intrigued by that, because I think you're absolutely right, that a lot of what the judge was doing was saying, as men, we have a responsibility to bring up boys so that they will be willing to go fight for the country. And so it seems to be deeply gendered to me, that this is very much about the man must be punished for not being a good father, because it's the father's responsibility to make sure that his son is willing to die for the country, which is intriguing, because there are various older ideas about civic education being something that women are responsible for, that mothers are responsible for.
Do we know what happened to Russell Tremaine? And if we do, anything that kind of stuck out to you or piques your interest?
Well, we know a little bit, and most of my knowledge of Russell Tremaine comes from internet searches, and because you can find, when he died in the 90s, there was an obituary published, which is very intriguing, because it actually mentions as next of kin his foster family, with whom he lived for a while. But he was reunited with his parents, and they lived together. They show up in the city directories together in Seattle in the 30s. By the time of World War II, I haven't found any indication that Russell served in the U.S. military. But by the 1940s, he started a long career working for the municipal transit company in Seattle, and he worked there basically his entire career. He does have children who are alive, and I have not yet. I'm a very cautious researcher in terms of trying to reach out to people and saying, "Oh, I'm writing about your family, and I'd love to talk with you," because I've done that in another project that I'm working on. But but it can be. You have to be very sensitive to do that, and you have to be very cautious about what you might find and whether or not people are willing to talk to you. But I haven't reached out yet to the family. I'm not certain I have good contact information. But yeah, I mean, he stayed in Washington. Actually, John lived to be he outlived Ethel. She died in the 40s. John Tremaine didn't die until 1957. Interestingly enough, he's buried up in Linden. There are members of the family, and I don't know. I haven't been able to track all of this, because one of the Tremaines, John, as far as I can tell, John was the first member of his family to move out to Washington, and he moved from Kansas. He was born in Illinois, but he grew up mostly on a farm in Kansas, and then he shows up in the 1900 census out near Sumas, and then by the 1910 census, and then soon after, city directories start showing that two of his brothers and his parents were living in Linden. And so the family gets established in Linden, and I think it's John's sister, marries a man named Muchler. And I know some Muchlers from Linden, actually, but I don't know if they're the same branch of the family. So I don't. So there are still connections to the family in the case that you can track today, but I've been kind of cautious about reaching out to people and trying to intervene in their family histories. But I'm very open. Sometimes when you give public presentations like this, that's what happens is people come up and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm related to the family." So it's happened to me before. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that Bellingham at the time was roughly 25,000 people.
Right.
And at the march, there's about 700 people. That's a pretty, I mean, that's a big portion of the population of Bellingham. So do you know if at any point in time, any of the people that were in the Klan infiltrated local government?
Well, actually, yes. I mean, although they wouldn't say that they infiltrated local government, they said that they were elected because the voters of the city agreed with them. I've seen an article from the Herald that suggests that the city attorney for Bellingham was a Klan's member, a Klan member. I haven't. Again, I've been focusing very closely on this limited period of time, and I know there are other people who've looked at the Klan before when it first comes to Whatcom County, and who've also looked at it a little bit after I have. One of the things that intrigues me, because I found some, actually years ago when I first started teaching at Western, a reporter who was working for the Herald at that time brought me some material out of the morgue, which indicated that the Klan was still pretty active in Bellingham as late as 1929, even though on a national level it was not very active by then, in part because a couple of scandals had really rocked the organization and challenged many of the members' beliefs about what the organization stood for. One of their leaders was accused of basically raping a person, raping a woman, and so that was. That really hurt the Klan as a national organization, but it seemed to live on in Bellingham or in Whatcom County for quite a bit longer. But there definitely were connections between the local government and the Klan. Ron would know more than I would. The man sitting behind you would probably know more about what happens to the Klan in the 1930s. But I'm at this point I'm pretty narrowly focused on this case in the middle of the 1920s. So
I don't know what happened to the Klan. But
You
the
don't?
Klan did go away. My research about the 1930s suggests that the Klan was, as you said, very openly engaged here as a civic organization. Had a downtown Bellingham office
Right.
until 1932, at which point it goes away. And I've also read the same stories about the city attorney and those kind of activities. Some of the stories I've heard over the years I thought were apocryphal, like the cross burnings on Seaholm Hill. But I have found first-person historical accounts, witnesses seeing that activity on Seaholm Hill, I believe later
Really?
in the late 1920s, early 1930s, including the student body president of Western.
Wow.
Has an oral history account of walking to school one day and seeing this cross burning on top of the hill, something he never forgot. So I wanted to ask about another one of those stories, which was I've run across, which is that sometime, and I believe it was in the late 1920s, there's a story floating about that the Klan one day basically commandeered a city council meeting, paraded through the council chambers, full sheet uniforms with the American and the Christian flag, singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic or something, and the entire meeting just stopped and waited until they were finished, and then they marched out. Have you ever heard anything about that or something close to that?
I haven't, although I mean, there are other people who've done more work on the Klan than I have. In fact, I'm trying not to get typecast as the person who writes about the Klan. But no, I haven't heard that particular story, and I haven't run across source material. Of course, I got into. I mean, I've gone page by page through the Herald, all the way through. I think I'm through 1926, but I haven't really gone much farther than that. In part because it's really a time-consuming, laborious process to go. And sometimes it's intriguing, too, to read a newspaper from a place that you've lived for a long time and to say, oh, well, here's this article about the Alamo apartment building being built, which was 1926, too. So.
Well, I'm just intrigued a little bit with the Tremaine family having such strong beliefs and, so publicly being taken to court and so forth. Well, I was wondering, what kind of support did this family have? Religious support of any kind? Were they doing this? Were they just the minority of the minority? Where did they have how did they decide to go against the whole system over here?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one of the things that does puzzle me, and I haven't found complete answers. I don't know enough about the Elijah Voice Society. There had to have been a local chapter of that organization here. Everything I've seen that was produced by the Elijah Voice Society has a Seattle address on it. So it seems to me to be a kind of a regional version of the Bible student movement. And clearly the Tremaines were getting support from the Elijah Voice Society, but in some ways I just have to kind of triangulate and figure out, based on other evidence, what that support might have been, because the ACLU informants and people in the ACLU office who produced quite a bit of correspondence around the case complain about the role of the Elijah Voice Society in limiting access to the Tremaines, in telling the Tremaines what to do, especially because the ACLU really wanted to file an appeal, but the family really didn't go along, and the Elijah Voice Society was often blamed for telling them that they shouldn't do that. But I haven't really been able to find the names of people in Bellingham who might have been very supportive. I mean, at one point, Russell Tremaine was living with an aunt out near Linden, and so the family, the Tremaines don't seem to have been really estranged from the rest of their family, but the rest of the family didn't seem to share their religious beliefs. It seems as if John and Ethel really moved in a different direction from the rest of the family, and yet the rest of their family didn't just dismiss them, but they didn't embrace their religious views. So,
Please join me in thanking Dr. Leonard one more time for his talk.